So our next speaker is Dr. Gamba-Rios. He's the Endangered Species Interventions Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean initiatives at Bat Conservation International. He's been working with bats on ecology and conservation for over 2 decades and is responsible for identifying priority areas in the region to focus on and working with in-country partners to co-develop effective strategies to protect and recover endangered bat species, populations, or habitats. So his talk is using acoustics to identify critical habitat for the endangered Florida bonneted bat in southern Florida, USA. So I shall hand you over.
Hi everyone, today I'm sharing about the work that we're doing with the Florida bonneted bat, Eumops floridanus, in southern Florida in the United States. The data I'm presenting today tends to combine effort on multiple organizations, including at the federal level with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and at the state level with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. But also we have multiple organizations that have been supporting our work and our efforts in different ways. And I want to highlight Dr. Frank Riley. He's our major collaborator. He's the director of the Conservation Department at SU Miami. And also Stephanie Brines. She's part of our team in Miami, and she's taking a lot of the data that I'm talking today. Very quickly, it'll be about the Florida bonneted bats, Eumops floridanus. This is a recent species and was described in 2004 and was a separation of Eumops glaucinus. This is a species that was a large distribution and it was separated into 3 species. Eumops ferox, that is going to be in the individuals that you can find in Central America and the Caribbean, Eumops glaucinus for all the individuals in South America, and Eumops floridanus, that is the largest one, that is the individuals here in southern Florida. The Florida bonneted bat has a really small range distribution in southern Florida. You can find it south of Orlando to Miami. In general, you can see them in both coasts. This insectivorous bat is a really social species. They have a harem system. That means that they're going to be a dominant male with multiple females, and they're going to have a small groups between 10 to 15 individuals. The collocation call of the Florida bonneted bat is very distinctive. They're going to have a really low frequency under 20 kilohertz. That means that it's really audible for most of people when the bats are flying around and echolocating. And the frequency is going to be 14 to 18 most of the cases kilohertz. And so that makes our work very easy when we do an acoustic monitoring around the different areas of interest. So also in the past, we've been using the calls to lure the bats into the mist nets when we need to have access to them. For natural roosts, we can find these bats use cavities in trees, and because it's a large species, they're going to need big trees with a bigger diameter, so their cavities are larger. Around 30 years working with this species from all our partners, we only know about less than 30 natural roosts in all the distribution range, but right now we know there are less than 6 active roosts in different areas along the range. So it's definitely this is a limited factor for the species. Within the distribution range, we estimate that less than 70% of the potential natural roosting habitat is available for these bats. And from the work from our collaborators, our partners at the state level in natural areas, we know that less than 2% of trees in these forests have any kind of cavity. Now, these cavities, they're going to have specific requirements for this species. As I mentioned before, this is a large bat, so it's going to need really bigger cavity. So we need older trees, over 80 years old trees, and they need these cavities to have a really high because the wing design of this species don't allow them to fly from the ground, so they need to jump out of the tree, so they need a specific height, and also they need an open space for emerging, as again because the wind design, they cannot avoid obstacles easily, so they need to have a really clear open area for emerging from the roost. One of the major threats for roost availability for this species is major storms like hurricanes that are going to destroy the forest and the emerging trees that these bats are going to use for roosts here in southern Florida. So overall, we have climate change, and we see an increase in frequency and intensity of these major storms. So on the left, you see the map that I showed before from the potential forest and habitat, roosting habitat available for the species, and on the right, just some general information about the major storms hitting those areas over time. And this does not include all the hurricanes and the major hurricane that hit southern Florida on the west coast last year. So for this species, roost availability is the most important limited factor, and that helps us to design a strategy and thinking on different tools that we can use in order to support this species. Land conversion and development is another factor that is affecting the species, and since COVID-19, a lot of people in United States have been trying to move to southern Florida. They're going to have a really nice open areas and in a really nice weather all year round. That is affecting natural roost availability because this conversion of these lands, but also foraging areas. Any open space in the region is a potential area for using for development. So this is really affecting the species at different levels. So on the map, you can see again on green the potential roosting habitat for the species, and yellow, orange is the current urban developed areas, and on red is what is going to be developed in the next 20 to 30 years. So we need to see these urban areas as a conservation opportunity. So we're thinking in general, 17% of potential forests left for the species, and we had around 22% of land that is going to be urban development. We can thinking about almost 40% of the area within the range that we can work in favor of the species. So we need to think in a really holistic approach where we're going to increase roost availability, not just in natural areas, but also in urban settings. And also by including urban ecology and working in urban areas, we're going to increase connectivity and also going to help to gene flow. We already know from previous work that we have 4 distinctive populations within the range, and there are not really much genetic flow between those populations. So by having this approach and incorporating urban settings, we can increase and favor this genetic flow between the different populations. So definitely we need to think in urban areas as a conservation opportunity for this species. All of this information help us to identify that urban settings, urban areas, and urban ecology is a priority for us to work on in order to have a really holistic approach to recover the species. And especially since our partners at the federal and state level doing an amazing work in natural areas, we can focus on urban settings. And for that, we choose working in Miami because we know that the Florida bonneted bats have been using or been in the city since the 1930s. So we have records of that in the area. And the first approach was to simply understand how the bats are using the different areas. So for that, we deploy multiple acoustic recorders, SM4s from Wildlife Acoustic. And that started to help us to give us a first picture of which areas the bats were using. And so most of the data is from 2019. This data on this map is from 2019 to 2021. And in general, Miami is located between 2 natural borders or boundaries. One of them is in the right to the ocean and to the left to the Everglades National Park. So the bats actually can only move from north to south within those 2 boundaries. In the map, you can see the big circles in red brownish orange color. That is show the general bad activity from those different areas. And since 2019, we have multiple more areas, but in general, they're going to show the same trend. And on purple, we're going to see the Florida bonneted bad activity relatively to the general activity. So we see that bad activity decrease near the borders, these natural boundaries to the national park on the left side and on the bottom, and they're going to have a higher activity in some parts of the city, and that is related mainly to tree coverage. So as I mentioned before, so this is data from 2019 to 2021, and here you can see the representation of 22 sites. We identify for Miami 8 species. All of them are insectivorous bad. So on the map, you can identify the big circle in the center of the city with the highest activity in general from any kind of bats, and also from the Florida bonneted bats. That location is Zoo Miami, and that is the reality is an oasis within Miami. They have a really large forest, 600 acres of pine rockland forest in there, and that is key because there are not any other area in all the East Coast of Southern Florida with the same characteristics that this zoo or this property has. And these bring and support a lot of bats. In general, you can see that the level of activity in this property. And the other that is interesting for us is the other areas that the bats are using a lot is golf courses. And this been a surprise, especially for all the pesticides and the different ways that golf courses are managed. But the reality is that for these bats in urban settings, there are not many open, dark spaces that they can use. So they're going to rely on these kind of areas and properties to survive. And in Miami, we have the most common species is the Brazilian free-tailed bat in our acoustic work, and the Florida bonneted bat is the third more common species within all the 8 species. So all of that activity that I was showing you before is totally correlated with tree coverage, and as we know for multiple series and multiple areas, the tree coverage is associated with the median house income in any city. So that means neighborhoods with more income or more wealthier, they're going to have more tree coverage, and that is where the diversity and the bats are. And these bats is no deception. They're going to using and roost in areas where they're going to be a higher tree coverage. Those areas looks like that. This is on Coral Gables, and these wealthy neighborhoods, they're going to have, as you can see, a high level of trees, and they're going to also have small lakes, so they're going to be water resources for the bats. They're going to live in those houses. So in general, we know, as I mentioned before, that since the early 1930s, we have records of the species. And the advantage for us is that Molosids is the family that Eumops floridanus belong to. They are really well adapted for urban settings, and that is help us to definitely just identify what we need to do in order to support the species and helping them to thrive in these urban areas. And we observed that these species have a really high phenotypic plasticity when they're selecting roosts. So they're going to mainly find what is available, and they're going to start using it. The problem with that is we're going to have a lot of human-wildlife conflict, and for that reason, we're trying to identify how we can reduce that conflict between homeowners that the bats are using their house, despite that they are the perfect neighbor that you can have, because they're going to have a small groups, as I mentioned at the beginning, and they don't have any particular smell, and they're not really noisy. Most people never know that they have these bats in their houses until they have to repair the roof, and is when these conflicts start to happen. So we identify bat houses as a potential tool. they've been using in other parts of the range and been successful there. So we know that we can use these houses in the area and remove the bats from the bat houses, or provide an alternative for these bats to move into these bat houses and reduce that conflict between homeowners and the species. But these bat houses are not perfect. They have issues. We know very well about global warming and how this is affecting bats on artificial roosts. So there's a lot of literature discussing ecological traps and how these bat houses are affecting these species and the records in Canada, Europe, in the United States. So if we're going to use these bat houses as a potential conservation tool, we need to be sure that we're providing not just a solution in the short term right now, but also they need to last. We need to be securing that we're not affecting the bats in the long term as the temperature continue increasing. So during the period of 1 year, we try and test 3 different designs. A single chamber, that is the design that is used across the range, and mainly is because the bats been using it. So it's a really safe way for a lot of people to invest in a roost that they know that the bat's going to use. Also, we have a natural snack. So we just take a piece of big piece of tree, cut it in half, and carve the cavity inside, and the rocket box. So the artificial snack, as I mentioned, we open it, we carve that, and all of those we cover it and have data loggers inside, and then we provide it to the height that the bats need in order to emerge in from there. The rocket box is really big structure, it's over 60 pounds, and we installed as well in around 40 feet high from the ground. And we are going to monitoring the temperature and humidity, but mainly temperature, that is the most important factor for them, across 1 year. And I'm going to just focus on 2 points: the minimum temperature in February and the maximum temperature in July. So during the summer, that is the figure on the left. I'm sorry that the temperature is in Fahrenheit, but in general on brown is the rocket box, and there are multiple lines because this is a multi-chamber kind of roost. We have different data loggers in different points of the different chambers. We have on pink the single chamber, on green the artificial snack, and on blue is the ambient temperature. So we can see that during the summer, the single chamber overpassed the other kind of roost. And it's very interesting that the rocket box is very stable and very similar to the temperature of the natural or artificial snack that we try to simulate as a natural roost. During the winter, is also we see that the single chamber, they're going to lose the temperature very quickly. It's a smaller structure, it's very open, but the rocket box is going to perform well, and it's going to have these pockets of hot air inside of them, and it's going to provide a more stable and warmer temperature than the outside. Definitely the artificial snack, that is the simulation of natural roost, is providing the best result. But for us, the most practical way and the most easy way to building is these rocket boxes, and this is the one that we've been using across the different areas where we're working. And the most important part is the bats are using it. So these rocket boxes are going to provide 2 chambers, and the advantage of that is the bats can move between those 2 chambers, but also they can move around 360. So depending if the sun is hitting one side and it's too hot, the bats can move into the other side. But also this provides enough height, so if the top of the roof is really hot, they can move it down in a safe way where it's going to be more fresh, there's going to be a higher airflow. So this is provide a lot of alternative, and the bats can really select in what is the best areas for them to choose within the roost. And we're looking for that as a long-term conservation tool for this species. Also, we've been surprisingly on how successful and how quick these bat houses have been occupied. The first bat house was occupied within 3 weeks, and now the record that we have is the bats moving to a roost within 3 days. So that shows that the bats are looking for and need more roost availability. When something is pop up and they identify and find them, that definitely going to use it. And we've been really strategic where we locate these routes, and we use a lot of the acoustic information from our acoustic monitoring to select the places where we're going to set up these bat houses. So any area, potential area, we're going to first deploy a bat detector, and we're going to leave it there for a few weeks to identify if the bats are really flying through, if they're using this area or not, because it's an investment and we want to be sure that the bats, at least when they fly through that area, they can identify a new object, and they're going to investigate, and they definitely lead to the bats using those artificial roosts. So over time, the bats, and we've been seeing how the bats start using more and more of the roost. At the beginning, in most of the cases, individuals, single males, are going to move into this roost, and then they start to recruit females, and we can see how these social groups start to form, how they to grow, and especially because we do monthly monitoring of all the roosts that we have in the area. So right now we have over 170 bats using our roosts, 60 roosts within the Miami-Dade County area, and we are increasing the number of roosts. Right now we're in the ready to deploy another around 10, 12 new roosts in key areas we already identified with the acoustics. So we're just finishing all the permitting in order to deploy these new safe havens for the bats. So I know that 170 individuals don't sound like much, but that is the largest non-population of Florida bonneted bat in all the range. So here on the map, you can see Babcock Webb on the left that have over 80,000 acres, and that is managed for our state partners. And in that property, they have over 160 individuals, and they've been working on that area for over 10 years. So they know that property very well. And the other side, here in Miami-Dade County, at Miami, at 600 acres land, we have over 100 individuals roosting in our bat houses. So that is have a really high density. Overall, in all the counties I mentioned before, we have over 170 individuals just in our bat houses, and that not include all the bats that are using buildings and houses in the city. So we have a really healthy and really big and stable population of Florida bonneted bats here in Miami. But what makes Miami so unique that we saw the highest activity of all the bats and the highest activity of Florida bonneted bat in this small area. So in general, our acoustic monitoring and all the information that we have now about the species, and we've been learning through the species, showing us that it's a mosaic of biotic and abiotic characteristics. In general, first, they have the pine rockland forest in there. That means that they have a place with food. So that forest that is in this property is going to provide all the food that the bats need. The second one, as you can see in the picture, in one of the areas, and this is the parking area of the zoo. So it's a really, honestly, really big open space. That is the way that the bats see it. It's a perfect foraging area. So the concrete is going to stay warmer, and the insects are going to come out in the evening out of the forest to these areas, and this has become a really nice place for the bats to forage. Like many molluscids, these bats need open spaces to foraging without obstacles, and this is a perfect ground for that. The other things that we've been observing, and this is like you can see on the top left part of the slide, is that they're not light in this property. So the zoo closed around 5 p.m. and everyone leave the property around 6-7 p.m. and it's totally darkness, and this is perfect for the bats. So all of that without any big buildings that are going to become an obstacle for the bats, making the perfect place for this species and other bat species to use in this area. So we have Zoo Miami. The perfect property is the core population of all the Florida bonneted bats in all the East Coast. So we have the most bats, we have the most activity, and the bats are really successful in this property. So a few years back, we have one Miami Wells, and all of start like a big development area in the same parking lot where the bats are foraging, where we have a lot of social activity and a lot of activity of multiple species. And they want to develop a resort, this hotel, a water park, and a mall and restaurant section. So they want to destroy all of that. And the most important part, foraging ground for this species in all Miami to develop this attraction. And of course, as a business opportunity, they have a lot of the support of the commissioners at the Miami-Dade County, and that was how they started. In 2012, our collaborators at Zoo Miami, they do an acoustic monitoring of the property, and they saw Florida bonneted bat activity, and especially on the open area and the parking that I mentioned before, and one of the back lakes that you can see on south of the map. But they didn't have the reference of what's happening in the rest of the county. In 2019, when we launched our project, we started monitoring again this property, the zoo, but also we're monitoring multiple sites across Miami-Dade County, and we saw the difference from what was happening in this property and what's happening in another area. So from the 9 sites that we were monitoring across Miami-Dade County, so Miami, as you can see in the figure, have a really high activity, 500 times more activity than the next site. And that shows that something was happening. And this area was very important for the Florida bonneted bat, but not just for them, for other species were using that space. But from all the bats that we're finding in this property, the largest activity was driven by the Florida bonneted bat, and we see that peak of activity during the summer. And again, this is the combination of all of these factors, having the forest, but also having the space where the bats can foraging, and that is that make this unique place so valuable. And that you see in the picture is, if we don't do something, they're going to change. For on the right, you're going to see a water park. On the background, you're going to start to see hotels, and on the left, you're going to see a set of restaurants and boutiques and shops for people. So we're going to lose this important ground for the species. So we have to do a multidisciplinary approach and combine effort with multiple organizations and in Miami-Dade County, like the Tropical Audubon and also the Center for the Biological Diversity. And we find really good partners also on Carlson and Fields, and it's a law firm, and these guys definitely start tackle this issue and working with us in order to stop this development. So in general, our technique was sue the county and sue the developer, and in order just to start to delay their progress, mainly because they have a timeline to have all the permits and have all the information and all that they needed in order to break ground and start constructing. So that was in general the strategy that we started using in order to stop this develop in this critical area. Also, we rallied with the community and we started having a lot of attention, especially all of this was driven by the data that we obtained from that information from 2019. Of course, we increased the information over time, but that set of information that we have in 2019 was the trigger for all of this. And all the people start to see in the community that we have solid information that the bats were using this area, and all of that was thanks to these acoustic monitorings that we've been using in the area. And was a surprise for us. We never expected, I never expected that this acoustic monitoring, that we just start to understand how the bats were using the different areas in the city to become the most important set of data in this city to save that space. And we tend to, over time, we find a lot of allies. And here in the tall guy that you can see in the picture is Ron McGill, and he's the spokesman of the zoo, and he's a local celebrity. And when he jumped in and started working with us, everything started changing because the community started to hear him, and the community started to working with us in order to stop this. And the community and all our supporters start to attend all the commissioner meetings to just support the efforts to save the bats, and they start to feel the pressure and start to see that the community was behind this bat and against this project, and start to having a lot of weight on them. And now, thanks to that incredible support from other organizations and also for the community, the county start to see that this was a bad deal, that the water park can be located in another area that was not this critical site for the bats and other species, and they were ready to kill this. And after all this effort, and this was a few years of effort from our organizations, but all our partners and all the supporters and the communities against this, finally the county voted against this project. And this is fantastic. This is the first time in all Florida that an environmental group is winning a case against a development. So this is fantastic. And thanks to all of this was thanks to solid data that we have to show that the bats were there, that bats were using it, and that was nothing like this property. And again, I have to mention, this is an oasis. There are not other property in all the city that have the same characteristics. And the data that we collected in 2019 with the acoustic recorders provide that support, provide that information needed to save this place. And I just want to close saying that thanks to this acoustic monitoring, this acoustic data that we collected in 2019, we were able, with concrete information, to save this property, to save this area for the Florida bonneted bat, a critical area for the species and other species in there, and that we never have to underestimate the value of those baseline, of those base information that we're collecting in different areas. And I never expected, to be honest, that when I was trying to understand where the bats was, how the bats was using the spaces in Miami, that data that I'm collecting in 2019 is going to become the most valuable and important tool to save this property. So thank you, and I'm looking for your questions.
Wow, that was brilliant. A conservation success again. Absolutely fantastic. And thanks, Malachi, for being with us. I know you're incredibly busy, and I know you've got 1,000 things going on at the same time. But thank you so much. That was really an eye opener. But there are questions. You've got loads of questions, so we're going to try and get through as many as we can. I'll read them out to you, and yeah. So here we go. Could you trap and follow more bats from the known roost sites to see where else they might be going? I think this is on your earlier part of your presentation you were giving.
Yeah, no, that is a fantastic question. And right now we're working with collaborators from the Max Planck Institute, where they're going to help us to develop a specific GPS units that we can have on the bats. This is fantastic new units that we use in like a collar on the bats. Those GPS, the weight of those GPS is like a business card, really, really light. It's incredible light. And we started working 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. We started setting the first GPS units on them, and we're excited to see where this data is taking us. We want to understand from the roost, from the bats that are sleeping, how they're moving to the foraging areas. So, and a lot of mollusks, they fly really high sometimes. So is these bats are going in high altitude and moving within areas in a high elevation, or they're flying through the canals or through, stepping stone between parks in the city. So we're really curious to see how they're using the landscape to move to the foraging sites and the foraging areas, to working with the county and working with the different cities to figure out how to improve the conditions for the bats to move between sites.
Oh, and will you come back and tell us what your results are?
Definitely.
Excellent, excellent. What was your method for quantifying tree cover in the urban areas? Were you only including trees in contiguous areas, or also trees along streets? So were you looking at all trees, or was it like forests and those sort of things?
Yeah, this definitely it's not my data. This is data that the county collected over the years. So they have a really nice team that they're identifying all the trees. So they have a really targeting method, so they know where all the trees are located. So it's in general more like a counting process where all the trees are available. So that is the way they're doing
it. There's a question here which could apply to any of BCI presentations today. Thank you so much for an insightful presentation, by the way. My question is, how can one begin studying and working on echolocation from scratch in areas where there's absolutely no existing research or resources to support it?
Oh, that is a very good question. And in general, we have the good luck that right now, as John mentioned before, and you mentioned on the previous discussions, that there are books of different regions. And I know that for most parts of the world, there's some reference, at least from some species, that start to give you some light of what the species are in those places. And then when you capture in, there are definitely specific methodologies. When you identify the bats in hand and when you're releasing the bats, that you can record in those calls, and that can help you to later on identify the bats that you're collecting in a passive way on other sites.
Cool. Yeah. And I suppose there's other things such as, just go out there and record what you've got and see if you've got rhinolophus shaped calls and like tick shaped calls and long thin myotis type calls, and just get that general data. Because I think as was in with John's presentation, recorded things out in the middle of nowhere, didn't know what they were, but then could reference them back in time. So yeah. Good tips. Are the tree cavities used by Florida bonneted bats caused by fire, lightning, rot, or by woodpeckers, or all of these things, or don't you know?
In general, there are association with woodpeckers, and especially there's a woodpecker that create the cavities in live trees. That sadly, that woodpecker is not anymore on the southeast Florida, so that is extirped from that area. So there are not really nothing that can create those cavities right now on trees that are available in that region. So the woodpecker is in the other coast, on the west coast, and the bats can use the cavity that this woodpecker are using. So definitely the creating artificial roost is the most viable tool that we have right now on the east coast for these bats.
It's funny because you mentioned the bat boxes, and I really liked the rocket box. It's something maybe we should use in Europe a bit as well, or trial it if it's not been tried. It may have already been done. Yeah. There's 3 questions here which all relate to the rocket box, I think. Are there plans or designs available for the rocket box? I think that someone specifically wants to know that. But 2 related questions is, what's the best location, and is artificial lighting a problem? And how does the rocket box change throughout the year? In other words, are the bats using them at specific times of year and then not at others, or are you getting greater numbers? And so I've thrown 3 questions at you there at once. Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. Fantastic question. So in general, we don't have available the plans for the rocket box. Mainly, we're working very tight with the Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and because it's a fairly endangered species, they want to be sure that any bat house that is installed is usually trying to be on on public properties because that don't change hands. One of the service is afraid is that they install a bathhouse in a private property and they want to sell the house, and the next owner don't want the bats, is going to create an issue. So for now, they prefer that all the installations are doing in public properties, so we can ensure that there's going to be a continuity and we're going to protect the bats. The other reason that is not available right now to the public is for the quality of the materials. We trying to use a really high quality good that is going to last for 15 years at least. So because once that we have an endangered species, the last thing that you want is a roost that is going to fall apart in a year or something very quick, you know, and especially in South Florida with all the cold weather and the hurricanes. So here we need to think in the poles, and all the structure have to be hurricane resistant. So there are a lot of concerns that we have related to the security and the structure of the roost. So for the reason right now we don't have it available to the public, but definitely we'll always hear the public, and we can when they suggesting us, we usually visit the sites and we're working with them to try to identify new areas for those roosts. And to the question about how the bats using the roost, they stay all year round in the same roost. So once identified, it's a very nice to see the male, then the male collecting, you know, recruiting more females and then having pups. We usually visit these roosts monthly. We have a camera that we put inside so we can count in and see what is going on. So it's really nice to see how they're using and the groups growing over time, but they stay. Once that they find a roost, they're going to have a high fidelity to the roost, and mainly because there are not many options available for them.
We're running out of time, but I'm trying to pick questions that they're all related. It's been brilliant. Hello, very interesting work. Congratulations. It's always good. My curiosity is, have you tried to use the bat social or echolocation calls to attract bats to the new bat houses, or is this not necessary?
Well, yeah, we as I mentioned before during the presentation, we've been so lucky with this that most of our bat houses have been used in general. So we don't have even the need to thinking how else we can attract them to the new roosts and to the new installations. But I think that a lot of that is, as I mentioned, the ability to combine the recorders from Wildlife Acoustics, that we can see the activity, and so sometimes we choose different or we reject areas where we see a really low activity that the bats are not flying through. So if the bats are not using that space, we are avoiding to install a bat house in there because they're never going to fly through or check the place. So the chance that they find it is going to be really low. So we're really strategic on how we select the new place where we're going to install the bat houses.
Oh, it sounds like it's such a good project, and it's such a good, nice, happy ending that you've got on the back of this. There are more questions that they keep coming in. I can't keep up with them, but if you wouldn't mind answering them in the Q&A at the bottom, if you've got time to do it, it would be brilliant. And I just want to thank you again. These talks are just so enlightening and give encouragement to us all. So thank you, Melky. It was really good to meet you here, and a big round of applause. You'll see lots of applause things going up. There you go. Look at that. So thank you very much for that.